Okay, well, welcome everyone. Thank you so much for joining this dialogue with Visionaries. Today we are going to be discussing the yoga of creative inspiration with Victor Shamas. And I hope I said that right.
Close enough.
Okay, Shamas. And he has been delving into the mysteries of creative inspiration. He's a psychologist, author, and educator, and has been devoting his life to the understanding and exploring of every aspect of this experience. And I think he might have a book cover to share with us, to see an image of some of the books that he has. So Deep Creativity is a book cover. Wow, I hadn't seen that cover before. It's just beautiful.
Yeah, that's the Eye of God Nebula on the cover, which is significant to the book.
Yeah, beautiful. Very beautiful.
So thank you. So Rama, would you like to begin with any questions or opening?
Well, Victor is a very interesting person. He just gave a TED Talk on the art of creative inspiration, and has, for today's theme, changed it just for us, which is the yoga of creative inspiration. Victor, we're so happy you could join us today. And I just want to give you full play to speak about whatever you feel is close to your heart, what is important for those of us in this era, this time and space of our history. And I think you have so much to share. And just let it be your playground.
Well, first of all, Rama, thank you for having me. It's truly an honor and a delight. I've been excited about this for weeks. First time you and I spoke over the phone getting ready was so much fun that it was hard to get off the phone. And so I'm thrilled to be part of this series. And I'm honored that you would consider me a visionary to any extent. Thank you.
It sounds like you are a visionary. You're on the leading edge of various things. And we want to be part of that. We want to hear about this.
Well, sometimes when you get on the leading edge, you're far ahead of the mainstream, and they don't know what to do with you. And that certainly has been the truth in during my time in academia. I spent 22 years at the University of Arizona, and they had no idea what to make of me.
Yay! Yes, visionaries are always on the leading edge. And it's,
Rama, can you come closer to the mic?
Yes. Visionaries are always on the leading edge, and it's difficult sometimes for people to understand it. And then eventually it becomes the norm. But at first it seems like the abnorm. And, and you're not always seen for what you're presenting until later. So we love that. We love the leading edge. We love the visionaries who see into the future. And you're probably talking about where many of us have yet to go, aren't you?
I'm talking about an experience that I think is familiar to a lot of people. It's just that maybe people haven't learned to stay in that space for very long periods of time. Mm-hmm. So you have a moment of inspiration in your life. I'm guessing that maybe everyone who's participating today has had such moments, and they might last only a brief flash. They're unmistakable. You have a sense of clarity. It feels fresh. The experience feels like no other moment of your life. Like this is the first moment you come alive. It's the first moment, the last moment, the only moment. But it also has an element of transcendence. It takes you out of your normal perspective and the way you've seen things up to now, the way you've experienced the world up to now. I think that some of the great discoveries and realizations in human history have come out of these kinds of profound moments. Nikola Tesla, I know there's a movie coming out about him. He's the one who invented alternating current, and he came up with the AC generator while he was on a stroll with a friend after dinner, and he was reciting Goethe, he was reciting poetry, and when suddenly boom, he had this tingling feeling, and the whole thing, the whole structure of the AC generator came to mind in an instant. And he had and he picked up a stick. He started drawing the whole structure of it for his friend who was also an engineer, and saying, look, this is how this part works, and this is how it connects to this other part. And in a single moment, he envisioned this entire apparatus that didn't exist a moment earlier. I've always been intrigued by those kinds of experiences.
Yes, yes. And like Jung with the what we call the yantras, the ancient yantras, all these geometrical patterns just came to him. And yes, I'm sure others have had that, things come in an instant, a flash. Yes.
And so the question for me, I started out, I was a chemist at the time. I had a profound moment of realization myself. I'd been traveling through the South Pacific, and I actually witnessed a woman who was a devotee of Sai Baba, and she was manifesting vibhuti, the sacred ash from her hand. And I saw this as a chemist and thought, why not? What law of physics says that that's not possible? And then a few weeks later, I woke up from a dream. I woke up from sleep with a voice speaking to me saying, you are greater than you ever imagined. I really feel like that's been the theme in my life. It's a message that's meant for all of humanity. And I also knew at that moment that I was destined to write a book about the connection of creativity and consciousness. Only it took me 30 years to do it.
Yes, it takes that long, doesn't it, for greatness to appear? Oh, Victor, how inspirational you are. Well, tell me, how can we incorporate some of the knowledge that you have and through your experiences how can we incorporate this creative inspiration into our everyday life? And I know you used yoga as a source of creative inspiration, because yoga means oneness, it means union and totality. How do you see that weaving in to the creative expression of our everyday life?
The first thing where my path deviated from the scientists doing research on the psychology of creativity has to do with the answer to this one question, Rama, which I'm going to actually ask of you.
Uh-oh.
How many sources of creativity are there in the universe?
Oh my goodness. Could it be infinite?
It could be. It could be infinite. Or you could go the other direction.
None?
Right?
Zero?
You could, and in fact, that's how I ended Deep Creativity, with to say there's really no such thing as creativity.
Ah.
But before I got to that point, my answer was one. There's only one consciousness in the universe, and that consciousness abides in you and in me and in all things. And that's something that's been said throughout history by people much wiser than me, that there's one source, one creator, one creative spirit that moves through the universe. In the 21st century, it's okay to use the term creative spirit, but people use it with as if they're taking poetic license. And they mean something like, you know, your excitement about what you're creating, or your energy, your energy or enthusiasm. But for me, there is one source, one creative spirit, one creator, one light of awareness in the universe from which all things emanate.
Yeah.
And the reason I know that, Rama, is that something unexpected happened to me in this journey. I started off trying to study creative inspiration, and I was taught by my mentors in psychology that the way you do it is by you observe creativity in other people. So I was the scientist observing creativity in others, and I got my PhD in psychology. I did a postdoc. I sat down to try to write a book on creativity, and I came to this very, very harsh conclusion, which is that I didn't know anything at all about the creative process. My academic training had taught me nothing.
Yeah.
The scientific community has admitted in recent years that it really doesn't understand the creative process as it happens to human beings. We can create artificial intelligence that simulates what we think happens in human beings, but that simulation doesn't account for the fact that there's passion, that there's a bodily experience. You know, Peter Tchaikovsky, when he would create musical compositions, his body would pulsate and quiver. You don't have artificial intelligence doing that. You know, what's going on in the body? So the thing that was unexpected for me in my journey is that I said in around 1996, I said, I gotta stop, break away from this approach, this third person approach of observing it in others. If I'm going to understand creativity and inspiration, I need to find ways to immerse myself in that experience. And that change, especially in the last few years, has had a absolutely profound impact in my life. So at this point, it doesn't matter to me what people create. What matters is the experience of creating, because that experience to me it gets at the heart of who we are as human beings.
So do you see creativity as more of a process rather than a goal or a result?
Let me put it this way, Rama. I am more interested in the process than the result. Most people who study creativity are looking at a product. So the standard way the psychologists will study creativity is they'll have you produce something and then they'll rate it based on certain qualities, like novelty. Is this something that's unique that they haven't seen before? And value. So some observer or rater assigns value to it. Is this a useful idea? Is it something that is adaptive? And the truth is that when people are having these profound experiences that I call inspiration, insight, revelation, illumination, call it what you will, they don't care if it's novel. They don't care if it's useful to somebody else. What they're intrigued by is this profound experience. The Beatles would go into this trance when Lennon and McCartney would create music. They would kind of go into this trancey state, and they would be in it for hours, and it was so compelling for them that they would be writing music on days off, when they were sitting in hotel rooms, when they were at a party. Lennon and McCartney during this 2-year period from 65 to 67 were so prolific because they loved what it felt like in their bodies to be connected to this creative process. And that's how I feel about it.
Well, you know, there's a saying, I studied music when I was little, 5 to 12. And there was a prevalent saying with many music teachers that and I studied composition, that when you play certain music like Tchaikovsky, you can feel what they're feeling. I especially feel it with Beethoven. You can pick up on the feeling that they had when they were creating this product of their music. What would you say? Do you feel that's true? Like even a writer, if they're feeling very emotional as they write, that the reader will pick up on that feeling?
I think that's the real mastery of a great artist. Before the Mona Lisa became a celebrity, she was a work of art, and I think the reason is that people look at the Mona Lisa and they see something of what Leonardo da Vinci saw in her when he was creating that image. There's something of that mysterious, enigmatic character that he was capturing for posterity. So I think the great artists capture some of that feeling and sensation that they have during their moments of inspiration in ways that convey to somebody else. Yeah, I'm not surprised that you tune into what Beethoven was experiencing at the time of composition. People like Mozart or Tchaikovsky or any number of other composers, they were having these extraordinary, mystical type of experiences when they were creating. Mozart was very specific about that.
Do you think these great artists have translated spirit into form where others can see it to then understand spirit a little more?
Yeah, I think that is exactly how I would describe it. So for me, when I'm inspired, what I feel like is the creative spirit of the universe is something that I'm embodying in this moment, here and now. And I think that gets captured sometimes by great art. That's why we're drawn to the beauty of certain pieces of music, certain images that are so compelling, or a film, or any number of works of art.
Mm-hmm.
Even some great scientific ideas. I think that Einstein, in Deep Creativity, I consider him an artist, because he
Yeah.
delved into the experience the way artists would. He used intuition and imagination. I always refer to the fact that his special theory of relativity, he didn't come up with that theory by doing calculations on paper. When he was a teenager, he started to do these thought experiments. That's what he called them. These thought experiments were imaginative play, where he would imagine what it would be like, say, to take a ride on a beam of light. So
Mm.
when you imagine yourself riding on a beam of light through the universe, things open up that most people, that's beyond the range of experience of most human beings, right?
Yes, yes. Well, but as we think about that and imagine what it would be like to ride on a beam of
Mm.
light, which happens to be in the third chapter of the Yoga Sutras, by the way. Um, this is
With
profound. I think one could have an experience by just through the imagination.
So what does Patanjali say about riding on a beam of light?
It's the sutra on define the gravitational pull. You know, that we focus on, if we focus on uh, a ball of cotton fiber, for instance, we will grow as light as that cotton until we can walk on water, walk on moonbeams, and take to the sky.
Wow, that's so beautiful, and it's really consistent with my take on this, which is that when you have that experience that I call inspiration, it's a type of awakening.
Yeah.
You so I equate it to lucid dreaming. You know, when you're in a dream, and the moment you're aware that
Mm-hmm.
you're in a dream,
Mm-hmm.
you suddenly have your foot in two different worlds at the same time, right? You have the world of the dream, in which you're a participant, in which you're the creature, and forces of different forces are moving on you and influencing you. But ultimately, you also have the foot in the world of the one who's creating that dream in the first place, because all of the images in the dream, everything that happens in the dream, all of the characters, including the character of you in the dream, your body in the dream, if you can see it, is your creation. So
Mm.
what if it turns out that the reality that we call waking reality is just as dreamlike as the dream that we experience when we're asleep? There's a lot of compelling evidence in science to indicate that that is the case.
Yes, the yogis say that in, let's see, when we awaken from the dreaming state into our world that we know it, it's like death, that when we die, we awaken, but we're in a different body. But we awaken to another world. And so they say that sleep is the rehearsal for death. And the dreaming state, you know, staying aware. The Buddhists will say that sleep is the rehearsal for death.
Mm,
And
right.
and we learn to sleep looking through our eyelids. You know, it's
Mhm.
like we're sleeping, but we're not, we're still awake, even during the sleeping hours.
So even during deep sleep, these Tibetan sleep yogis will actually maintain awareness even during deep sleep, which is absolutely extraordinary.
Yeah.
And you see evidence in their brainwave activity of that. So
Yeah.
you see like another signal in their brainwave activity on top of the normal signal that somebody in deep sleep would show.
Oh, that's very interesting. Victor, behind you, there are some
Mm,
beautiful lotus-looking eyes, and they
yes.
look like the eyes of the great Ganesha, the elephant god that removes our spiritual and you don't have to move our spiritual and material objects in our spiritual path. Could you explain a little bit more? I mean, just love seeing that on the sides of you.
Well, this is an image that my beloved wife and wonderful yogini, Maria, formerly Mendola, now Shamas, she actually bought this in Thailand, and an artist on the street created it on the spot for her.
Oh
Isn't
my,
that extraordinary? And it was done with, I believe it was spray paint that was being done on the
oh,
streets of a city
yeah,
in Thailand by a street artist.
amazing.
Amazing, right?
Yeah,
Um,
love.
we have a couple comments in the chat. One of them was that from Kim, she loves the cotton ball image and the lightness of cotton fiber. And then the other question is, this is from Marie Fur, do you really think we create the dream?
Well, if we were lucid in the dream of reality, then we would have the same power to shape the dream that a lucid dreamer might have. Now, there's different categories of lucid dreaming. You could just be aware that the dream is a dream without actually being able to manipulate it. But the
Mm.
ultimate lucid dream is one where you can actually play with the conditions of the dream. A good friend of mine, Stephen LaBerge, has done a lot of work with lucid dreaming, and he teaches people that he calls neuronauts, they're explorers of the dream, to do things like fly or take a different body other than their own, like become a bird or some wild animal. And so what if it turns out that this reality that we're living in, this waking reality, is a dream? And you might say, wait a second. If this is a dream, how come you and I can agree that those are Ganesha's eyes behind me? Right? I mean, if this is a dream, then wouldn't, why do we see it so consistently? And my answer is that it might have to do with the fact that we're of like mind, that you and I have similar genetics, similar cultural influences, etc., that lead us to see the same image more or less. And I can never be sure that you're seeing that image in the same way that I am anyway. My point in all of that is that if we got to the point where we were really lucid in this dream called waking reality, we might be able to reshape reality in ways that we don't think currently are possible. So there's evidence throughout history. I'm sure Rama could tell stories. I know in Western traditions, there's stories of levitation. Saint Catherine of Siena could levitate as a child. Many people observed her doing it. I believe that Saint Teresa of Avila could levitate
Yeah.
also.
Yes.
And so we have evidence that the quote unquote laws of gravity can be at least manipulated, if not defied at times. That I know when you and I spoke before, Rama, that you were telling me about people who are pursuing immortality.
Yeah.
And so we assume that the body is got, whatever, 60, 80, whatever, some number of years in it, and then it starts to break down, and that death has to ensue of the physical body. The truth is that a lot of what we consider symptoms of aging in our bodies turn out to be symptoms of stress, toxicity, dehydration, any number of things that we don't even know right now what normal healthy aging looks like, because we don't see that many examples of it. But if you go to some places where people are living to 100 plus, you see it.
Yeah. And the immortalists believe the only reason we really age and the body does break down ultimately is that we're conditioned to believe that that happens and that we die. So if we can change our thinking, we might change the years that we live.
That is really perfect, perfectly in line with what I've arrived at in my own work, Rama, which is that the reason this turned into yoga for me is that I found that creative inspiration and the real juiciness of life lies beyond the constraints of my mind, the constraints of what I believe, my beliefs and judgments and self-concept, the conventions that I hold to be true. So much of what we think is true and absolute in the world is based on convention. What is a convention? A convention is two or more people coming together to agree on something. John Lennon said, I dream alone is just a dream, but a dream we dream together is reality. So if you and I are having the same dream more or less, and that dream includes the idea that your body breaks down in certain ways and it's going to follow a certain trajectory, then those beliefs are going to shape what our body does. In creativity, you always hear this in creativity, that creativity is quote unquote thinking outside the box, right? You've heard that many times, I'm sure.
Yeah.
And the problem I have with that, I've always had with that, is what creates the box in the first place? It's your thinking that's creating the box in the first place. It's an experience of life outside of that box. That's why the Yoga Sutras essentially begin with, silence the fluctuations of your mind, right?
Yes, yes. That's the box. Wow. Beautiful, Victor. Wonderful. Are there any other comments, Anne, or questions?
I don't have any other questions right now. So for those of you who do want to ask a question, you can put it in the chat. I don't have any questions from attendees right now, but I did have a question myself, which was a little bit earlier when you were talking about creativity and inspiration. It seems like there's a strong connection to time. And I wanted to understand that a little bit more. In yoga, Hatha Yoga Nushasanam, and now we begin the study of yoga, brings us, how can we be present in a moment of time, and how can we stay in the now and in that moment? And so how in inspiration and creativity do we avoid being stuck in past or future?
I love this question, and I really love it because it gets to the heart of it, that so many great teachers have told us, be here now, the power of now. My personal mantra is here and now, baby. And that mantra is there to remind me that this is where the action is. And for me to be in this here and now, what does that mean? Do you know what does it mean to be fully immersed in the moment? I mean, I'm going to ask everybody who's participating, do you know what that means? Because for me, I think it has to be an experience in my body, and I grant you that in the dream reality, the body is a dream, but it is our vehicle for experience, sensation, sensuality, movement. And when we free our bodies from the constraints of the mind in this moment right now, what's left? What's left when our minds, our self-concept, everything that comes out of our cognition, our beliefs, our expectations, our judgments, all of that is released for a single moment? What is that experience like? Now, my colleagues in psychology have a real simple answer for that. It's called death. They don't think it's possible in life for somebody to have an experience of life in this moment, here and now, in the absence of all thought. Now, I always like to point out that there's about a billion meditators in the world, and a lot of them have had the experience of this moment, you know, free of the constraints of the mind, including the constraints of time and space.
Time, yeah.
You have to, right, to really be in this moment. That's what's really interesting. To be really in this moment, you have to be free of time, because if you're not, this moment doesn't exist, because this moment has already passed by the time you're referring to it. We have a half-second delay in consciousness. That's been documented by psychologists, by neuropsychologists. That means that by the time I become aware, my mind becomes aware of this moment now, it's half a second ago. It already happened. We missed it.
Yeah. Well, I used to have the experiences of where time, which also includes space, became superimposed upon one another. And many years later, I found it in the sutras, the superimposition of past, present, and future. And that becomes the now. And it's like it becomes where time seems to collapse upon itself to be in the moment.
Oh, can you tell me what exactly it says? So it says that past, present, and future merge in the now.
It's super. Like I use the word, and Patanjali used a similar word, and I don't know what it is right now, but it's like superimposed. Like you don't go from one chronologically to the other, but the three, past, present, future, they merge into a oneness of the now. And some people might call it the first stages of samadhi, but it is like it's all now. There is no past, there is no future, it's in the now. So part of the illusion, of course, they say, where our mind waves are not still, is where we are in the past and we may jump to the future with anticipation or fear, and we're not in the now. And I think that now is the beginning of the samadhi experience, when the three collapse on one another. I don't want to use the word collapse, though, but it's more like, I use the word superimposition of those three.
Well, one of the conclusions at the end of Deep Creativity after 30 years is that everything that ever was or ever will be is here right now. Yeah. So that's true, that if in this moment is infinite and eternal, and everything that ever was is here with us, then the next conclusion is that nothing can be created or destroyed ultimately, because when the past, present, and future are superimposed, it's all here at this moment. Yeah. That means we can't create. The creation is an illusion. It's a cyclical dance that we're seeing. It's a pulsation of things coming and going into being, coming into being and going out of being. So the way I see Om, the way I experience Om is that cycling of creation, the form emerging out of formlessness and merging back into it, and for some, in that brief interface, it can be brief or it could be internal, just existing, so the phases of Om, it's right there. This is to me the creative spirit at play. So when I have to come up, if I have to come up with some practical thing for creative inspiration, and I have a number of things, it would be experience Om in your body. Because if you're experiencing Om in your body, what the Upanishads are saying is that Om is the entire cosmic cycle of creation. The entire process of creation is held in Om. So if you want to experience creative inspiration, you have to experience Om fully. And every time I have these experiences of inspiration, Rama, it always comes back to Om.
Everything comes back to Om.
Well, Victor, while you were saying that, I think you sort of answered the question, but Kim had a question and she said, I have the Yoga Sutra books and a great head start. Where else would you begin learning of being present more and more? And I think that was about Om. And then Marifer also said, Samadhi is the here and now, agreeing with what you were saying about Samadhi. But I guess the question is about any other practical tips.
I feel really strongly that we have a lot of wonderful books and texts and scripture. What I did in Deep Creativity is I embedded some of the most inspiring writings of others as well as my own. But I think that it's really important to put down the books at some point, because if the thing is to silence the fluctuations of the mind, then we have to try to find the ways to put ourselves in that experience. One of my books is called The Way of Play, and I came to the conclusion that every meditator would love to have the single pointed focus that children have when they're playing. So if we could immerse ourselves in play, we could use it as a really profound tool for inspiration. Whatever your play is, as long as it's something that immerses you in this experience of this moment, and that isn't competitive, doesn't have a goal, doesn't require strategy or thinking. The other piece, I'm ducking out for a moment, here I am. So I wrote a book, co-wrote a book called Repose, the Potent Pause. And I came to repose through a set of circumstances, a long story. And only years later did I have Maria and other yogis say, that's just a form of Shavasana. It's a very open form of Shavasana. But what we found is that if you lie and repose in that very open position of repose for 7 minutes, it has some pretty powerful effects psychologically, physically. And my conclusion about that was that sometimes your body needs to lead your mind. When you put yourself in this open, receptive pose that is repose, that's a physical openness, physical receptivity, your mind eventually follows. There are a lot of examples in psychology where your body leads your mind. William James, who's the grandfather of modern psychology, said, we don't run from the bear because we're afraid because we're running from the bear, because we have, our heart is racing and our legs are moving, and only the final realization of bear, I'm scared, I better get the hell out of there. If we waited to draw that conclusion, remember there's a half-second delay. We've already given the bear a really big head start, and we could end up being bear lunch. So sometimes it's important to get out of our heads. So there's a number of books that have inspired me, and I'll mention some of them. Tibetan Book of Living and Dying. I love, Lama Yeshe wrote a book called Introduction to Tantra. Is 130 pages, and it is juicy, man. It's filled with all kinds of great stuff. But I read at this point in my life cautiously. I'll read a few pages and then I'll go into my experience of it, and I want to feel it in my body.
Yes, yeah, that's very important. Very important. Yeah.
It looked like Euladia had a question, but I don't see what it is. So if you unmute yourself, you could ask your question, Euladia.
That would be great. Hi, Euladia. That's my sister-in-law.
Oh, great.
My little sis.
Oh. Can we hear her?
Well, she has to unmute her microphone.
Okay.
Or you could type a question in the chat box, either way.
Oh, I see something. No question.
So we're a little bit after 4:30, and so if there are any questions, you can go ahead. We'll be officially closing the recording at 4:45, but I think we can stay on for a little bit longer if there's discussion that we wanted, more discussion. Oh, sorry, she said no question. All right.
Well, hi anyway, Euladia.
Oh.
Okay.
So, Victor, I found that it's wonderful to have an experience and then later read scripture or whatever books that speak about that experience. It seems to confirm it. And I like that much better than reading it and then having an experience, because I've always wondered if that was our mind implanting the suggestion of the experience. And I always thought it was better to have the experience first and then have it confirmed. What could
I,
you say something about that?
yeah, I'm so much in that camp. I know I told you in our last conversation that I consider myself a naive yogi because I've come to a lot of these things that I know through my own direct experience,
Mm-hmm.
and that then only after the fact. For example, I love the conversations that Maria and I will have, and she'll say, "Oh yeah, that was written about in this scripture or that
Thousands
that
of years
document."
ago.
And, and it's like, well, I don't know, I didn't know about it at first from anything other than my direct bodily experience, and I really speak from that perspective. And I want to say to other people is anything that I experience, when you're tapped into something sweet and delicious, you want to share it.
Yeah.
And so the reason I write these books, the reason I come and have a dialogue with you, Rama, is that I think we're tapping into something and we want to share it. If it feels good, you want other people to feel it too. And the the main thing is be an explorer. I think of myself as an explorer of these inner realms. And you take a moment like, sexual ecstasy. And for sometimes that moment is fleeting, but what if you could extend it? I've become really fascinated in recent years with this experience called ASMR. Are you familiar with it, Rama?
No.
ASMR is also known as brain tingles or brain orgasms.
Oh,
People might have it from a really light touch, or they
Yeah.
might have it from somebody whispering or crinkling paper or the sound of hair being brushed.
Uh-huh.
And the people who experience it on a regular basis will generally say that it's not sexual in any conventional way.
Yeah.
And the psychophysiology confirms it. When people are hooked up to things like heart rate monitors and other instruments that are measuring their physiology, it doesn't look like the sexual arousal. What it looks like is the point, that afterglow after you've had an orgasm.
Yeah.
And that afterglow is really interesting because there's not arousal, there's no place to go, there's no place you have to get to. You're there, man. And
Yeah.
so what if there were ways to get to that place that I think that everybody wants to be high, but the challenge is getting high.
Mm.
That the vehicles, so many of the vehicles for getting high are imperfect, like drug taking,
Yeah.
or many things. Even sexuality can become an addiction. There's so many things that we get caught in the vehicle and we miss the point, which is that the vehicle is just a vehicle.
Yes. And do you think humans are always searching for that cosmic orgasm?
I do. I think that we've had a glimpse, that everybody's had a glimpse of that high, that place of true connectedness. Of I call this bodily experience that I have now on a pretty regular basis, I call it shimmering. It's a
Mm.
vibrational experience that's happening in my body. And I think that shimmering experience, which Maria and I are writing about, among other topics in our new book, is something that many people have come to in different ways. I mentioned how Tchaikovsky's body would pulsate and quiver when he was creating pieces of music. That's why creative inspiration has been so fascinating for me, because that's a compelling way to get into that bodily experience. But there are many, many others.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. And it'll manifest in different ways with different people. There's so many different fascinating ways that this comes up. Well, Victor, is there anything, we have just a few minutes. It, that's not much to talk about this, but how could we apply like what you're giving in your classes, in your work, in your books? How can we apply this creative inspiration in a world, in our country right now, where people seem more depressed and they say ill? How can we apply this to create more unification within ourselves in a world that's so separated right now and divided?
Well, there are actually a number of ways that I'm aware of, Rama. First of all, some of the talks, if you go on YouTube, you'll see I've given a talk in recent months called The Creative Revolution. I think that what we're in the midst of right now is such a revolution in our world, and we're seeing old structures collapse, and the new ones haven't necessarily formed yet. We know that in the last 10 years, we know that people have mistrust of their government, their religious institutions, and the private sector, companies. Those are the three major types of institutions that govern our lives.
Yeah.
So we've lost trust in those institutions. I think that the reason is that those institutions and the way that they've been doing their day-to-day business has stopped working. And so what we're feeling is the strain of a global system that is shifting. Many traditions, and you can probably speak to it. I know that I've heard the Dalai Lama say that this is the century where war becomes obsolete one way or the other. You know, it's going to, so there's big shifts. My friends in the Joe Ray community believe that we're moving towards paradise on earth, and it sure doesn't look that way now. But you know, think about what it looked like a month or two before the Berlin Wall collapsed. We really couldn't have anticipated it. Some changes happen in a real discontinuous way. They come in an explosive way. Like you think about the civil rights movement or any of the changes that happened in the mid to late 60s. You think about the explosion of creativity in the arts. I mean, you know, I mentioned the Beatles, and Jimi Hendrix went from an unknown backup guitarist to one of the most, you know, influential musicians of his generation. And that happened in a period of 16 months or something like that. So there's times when we know that time is an illusion and the rate of change speeds up. But I would say to anybody right now who is in the midst of conflict with people who don't agree with them, who don't see the world the way they do, if you're into yoga, do you really believe, as I do, that there's only one source of creativity in the universe, that there's only one consciousness? The plural of consciousness doesn't even make sense to me. Consciousnesses sounds stupid, right? It sounds stupid. Yeah, the plural consciousness, it just sounds wrong. And the reason is that where we differ is in our different minds. And that's a beautiful thing, that you and I have a different mind with a different collection of thoughts and experiences that make up those minds. And the fact that you and I might live in such different worlds, that you're on the left and I'm on the right, or I'm on the left and you're on the right, or I believe there's climate change and you don't, that suggests that we're not perfectly of like mind, but the underlying consciousness is the same. And when I experience creative inspiration, I have no doubt about that. The beautiful thing about yoga, inspiration, other experiences that put you into that connection and one sense of oneness, is that when you experience it, you have no doubt that it's real. It's not just some scripture, blah, 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 that somebody in 1500 years ago wrote. You know, this is of this moment. So I want to, if I can for a second, I want to read something that was written by the Zen master Huang Po. You know, I put this in the book, but I never have read it. Your true nature is not lost in moments of delusion nor is it gained at the moment of enlightenment. It was never born and can never die. It shines through the whole universe, filling emptiness, one with emptiness. It is without time or space and has no passions, actions, ignorance, or knowledge. In it, there are no things, no people, and no Buddhas. It contains not the smallest hairbreadth of anything that exists objectively. It depends on nothing and is attached to nothing. It is all-pervading, radiant beauty, absolute reality, self-existent and uncreated. It's time for us to wake up from the dream of waking reality and keep one foot in this world. So let's play in this world of waking reality. And remember, it's play, it's Leela, it's divine play. It's the divine play of a creative force, a creative spirit that gives rise to all of it. And that immerses itself in all of it. So we have to, if we can keep one foot in this world of being the creatures that are being pushed around by the forces of the universe, and also another foot in this other realm of transcendent oneness with that which we have always been, which we are, have always been, and always will be, then I think that that's where the creative revolution happens. I think the moment we do that, our world changes forever. No question about it.
Oh, Victor, what a beautiful way to end our time together today. Even though we're talking about time, I don't want to end this time. Oh, it's been wonderful. We can't thank you enough. We've got to have more of this.
Definitely. Thank you, Rama. It was really as much of a pleasure as we thought it was going to be.
Oh, it's just wonderful. Anne, do you have anything?
Well, this has all been just amazing. There's one question from Marifer who says, I have a question about when I get an awe moment, I see a blue light, like a tiny blue light. How can that be translated in psychology? Spiritually, I enjoyed it and welcome it, and I'm not attached to it. But what does science say about it?
Well, that light, I actually don't think about science when I hear that. I actually think more about self-realization fellowship. And Yogananda spoke a lot about Christ consciousness. And he talked about that blue, it's like a blue radiant star. And it sounds like it's possible that you are experiencing something along the lines of what Yogananda has described. You might want to look at some of his works at talking about Christ consciousness. And I think that's what it sounds like you're tapping into, which is beautiful.
And
Wow.
Muktananda spoke of the blue light also.
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay.
Swami
Well, thank you so much. People are saying thank you. Great notes, wonderful information, good answers. So just thank you so much.
Thank you.
Oh, thank you, Victor, so very much. Namaste. Thank you.
Namaste. Let's do this again sometime.
And thank you, Rama. Thank you, Victor. Thank you, both of you.
Thank you, Anne.